right, happy Monday here at the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman. Lots to discuss with Rutgers athletics, spring sports wrapping up to a degree, some national news from an alum this past weekend. But wanted to start with men's basketball. Couple notes there. One bit of news that came out over the weekend and on Monday. Matt Norlander continuing his reporting on the Players Festival event in Las Vegas, Feast Week basketball tournament that Rutgers is linked to. Was reported last week that they are on board to be one of the 8 teams in the tournament. And Norlander reporting now that it is going to be split into 2 4-team MTEs. Part of this is because of NCAA rules require that you cannot participate in the same MTE in consecutive years. And part of Norlander's initial reporting was that it is a 3-year deal for programs to be in this. So that would be a way around it, at least initially. There are talks that the field will expand in the second year to 16 teams. But in terms of what he's reporting, he's saying that Rutgers is slated to be in a pod with Houston, Notre Dame, and Alabama. Obviously, that would be juicy from a Rutgers fan perspective with Cliff Omori recently joining Alabama. And then the most recent 2 NCAA tournament losses were to Notre Dame and Houston. From a scheduling standpoint, strength of schedule, Alabama and Houston look like 2 top 5 teams most likely going into next year. Notre Dame's, just going to be in year 2 of Micah Shrewsbury. So that is a game that on paper you would think Rutgers is probably going to be favored. Again, it's May. I think the biggest thing with all this reporting is that everything is still being worked out, right? Until it's officially announced and confirmed by the event itself, by Rutgers, I think things could change. I don't think this would be out there and being leaked if the idea of this happening was far off. I do think it's going to ultimately happen, but I do think it's the type of situation. I think it's interesting, right, that this leak is coming out with tidbits here and there, which makes me think that, details are not 100% here. So who knows? I mean, I speculated last week about the $1 million payout per team. I wondered if maybe that is spread out over the length of the contract, not just in 1 year. Who knows? There is private investors involved. The streaming rights seems like it's still in flux. Who's going to actually stream this thing? I know TV rights was part of the deal in terms of getting the ability, when you play in an MTE, you're exempt from your conference in terms of media rights, who you're broadcast on. So that was a big part of it. It wasn't initially an MTE at first. So this is an unprecedented event. It's an awesome event for Rutgers to be associated with. But I do think there's more details still to be worked out as we get these reports leaked here and there. And I'm sure there'll still be more to come. But, awesome event. I'm sure it's going to happen. But until it's officially announced, we don't know all the final details. So FYI on that. But obviously, if that is the 14 pod, if Rutgers plays those 3 teams, that will certainly be quite an intriguing 3-game set in Vegas over Thanksgiving for Rutgers men's basketball in what is already going to be highly intriguing, highly anticipated season ahead with Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey joining the program and a top 3 recruiting class, including Lathan Somerville, Dylan Grant, and Bryce Dortch. You have the transfers now, and that leads me to the roster. 2 open scholarships. Obviously, you added Tyson Acuff, you've added Zach Martini, you've added Jordan Durkak. What is Rutgers going to do with these last 2 spots? There's been some, speculation out there on social media. I've seen some things where, it's crazy. Great Asabor just reportedly signed a $2 million NIL deal and committed to Washington today. So that is not even a, I think Evan Maya on his website, I highly endorse it, great analytical site. He's not even a top 50 transfer in his rankings. So NIL, and obviously for big men, it's at the premium right now. So it's going to be interesting to see what Rutgers does. I know there's some thoughts out there, concerns, right? I would say that Rutgers is not going to add another big man. Obviously, they have Emmanuel Ebole back for year 2, coming off of an injury the year before. So there's hope he's going to be improved. Staff's really high on him. And then obviously you have Lathan Somerville. I think one thing to remember I think with this team, I think with all indications of how they're building, and I'm not saying it's going to be like for like exactly, right? But if I think you see some Zach Edey effect going on with the Big Ten. The Big Ten's always played plotting, big men centric, and I think that, Edey's out. You've seen some Big Ten teams add some high premium bigs. Obviously, Bello going to Indiana. You have Michigan adding two bigs with Wolf and Golden. So there's certainly that is the Big Ten, right? That's going to be that way. But I think Illinois is a great example from last year, a team that finished second in the regular season, won the Big Ten tournament, went to the Elite Eight, playing a very different style, right? They were up and down. It was their defense was suspect for a lot of the year, but they tried to outscore teams, and they did so more times than not. Now, I'm not endorsing that style, but I'm saying in terms of how they were roster-wise, in terms of size, in terms of athleticism, in terms of playing a fast tempo, fast pace, I do think Rutgers is going to replicate that to a degree. And although ideally, based on how Rutgers has played in years past, you want a legit rim defender, rebounder to replace Cliff. Dane Danger, their center, who didn't play huge minutes for them. He was 6'9". Now they had Coleman Hawkins, who's tremendous, and he's going to make a killing if he comes back. And no, Rutgers has no chance with him. But he is 6'10", but he is not a traditional 5, right? So he had a ton of athleticism, but they just played different, right? And I touched on before John Beilein's teams at Michigan. Peichel publicly talking about how much he loved those teams. And that team that went to the national title game in 2018, I mean, Mo Wagner was their starting 5, 6'11", that played on the perimeter and was not a rim defender or enforcer. So I think they're going to be very different, and that leads you to think if NIL is really high for the center market, and they don't want to just add a body to add a body. Yes, defensively, it would be a concern if they just went with Obole Somerville. Martini can play some small ball 5. We'll have to see. But I think jumping to conclusions right now and going back to the NIL, like everything you hear, right, it's all speculative. And there is no deadline this week, right? And I know people wish the roster was set, and I think everyone hoped it would be, probably Rutgers by now too. But again, teams don't report till June 15th. So there is still some time here, a little bit over a month. I had said previously, I think you'd like to be set by Memorial Day to have everything, set there. I do think, shooting wing is really, really important to add because you don't have a lot of proven three-point shooters on this team. Now, Martini shot 38%, high-volume 3 shooter, stretch 4 for Princeton last year. You feel good about him in that role. You have Tyson Acuff, who people don't feel good about because he shot a low percentage this past year at a really high volume, high usage rate. But they forget that 2 years ago at a high usage rate, he shot 35%. And year before that at Duquesne, he shot 39% on 70 attempts. So in a different role, not as the primary ball handler, the primary scorer, I think he's got the potential to shoot in the high 30s from 3 this year. So I'm high on him. Dirk Hack didn't shoot great from 3. Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, Ace Bailey shot really well from 3, over 40% in his senior year of high school. We'll see how that shakes out. Dylan Harper can hit the 3. Obviously a freshman, but, those guys can shoot too. So they have weapons, but I would love to see them add a proven wing with size that could shoot. The 3-and-D wing would be ideal. Jadon Jones was that type of player. He chose Oklahoma. They've been linked to PJ Hayes publicly. I think that's a name, it's a name I've been hearing. So keep an eye on in terms of who Rutgers could potentially add. He's played at San Diego in the West Coast Conference, a legit mid-major conference that has Gonzaga, that has Santa Clara, that has St. Mary's, that has San Francisco. San Diego finished 5th behind those 4 teams. He shot 40% at almost close to 200 attempts last year. He averaged 3.3 makes on 7.7 attempts from three-point range per game last season. So if that guy's an option, I think, that would be – and think about in the past too, right? Rutgers not having proven bench scoring. And if you're going to play an up-and-down style, odds are you're going to play a full bench. And, to have guys, proven scorers and shooters on the bench coming in to, give you 10, 15 minutes, whatever it might be, I think that's something you need. You need. And I think you could argue in the style of play that it seems like they're going to play. I'm not saying you don't want another big. I'm not saying you don't want a rim defender. It would be ideal. But I also think if you have to look at what's going to fit your new offensive style the best for a program that's been offensively challenged for a long time. And a plotting post-up big does not fit the style in which I think they want to play. But a shooting wing who can knock it down from three on spot ups in transition, that's what you need. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But just in terms of what they need, what I think they're going to do, I don't know what they're going to do. Are they going to fill both spots? Are they going to fill one? How much NI is left? There's so many unknowns. So to jump to any one set conclusion, I personally will not. But let's see what happens there. Let's move on. Chris Gotterup, Rutgers alum. Yes, his last year he did a post-grad at Oklahoma, but a 4-year golfer at Rutgers. I wrote about him a lot when I was at On the Banks and wrote at Scarlet Faithful. He won the Myrtle Beach Classic on Sunday by 6 strokes. First Rutgers alum to ever win a PGA Tour event. First win of his young career. 27th event in the PGA Tour for him. He basically doubled his career earnings in his first 26 events versus this one. He automatic bidded now to the PGA Championships coming up next week. And he's off to a great start in his professional career. Hope to have him on at some time. And it's just great to see him doing so well and to win on a national stage like that. So congrats to Chris Gotterup. Also, shout out to the women's team that was in the postseason. Rutgers women's golf team won the National Golf Invitational Championship in their first postseason tournament ever, and they won it. There were 10 teams involved, and they won by 3 strokes. Leah Devine has been, their best golfer for a couple of years now. She's won some tournaments, and she was great in this tournament. So congratulations to Coach Carrie Williams and Rutgers Women's Golf on winning that event. Also this past weekend, Rutgers Track and Field competing at the Big Ten Championships, and both Rutgers men's and women's teams having their highest ever finish in the Big Ten Championships outdoor. Rutgers women finishing 8th out of 13 teams, men's finishing 9th out of 13 teams. Coach Bobby Farrell doing good stuff once again. Bryce Tucker was the lone Scarlet Knight to win a gold in the 400 hurdles on this past weekend. You also had Sincere Robinson finish 3rd in the long jump. Brian O'Sullivan finished 3rd in the pole vault. You had Konstantinos Bouzakis finish 3rd in the discus. In terms of women's results, Chloe Timberg, defending Big Ten champ, she finished 2nd in the pole vault. Alex Carlson, great runner for Rutgers, finished 3rd in the 1,500 meters. And you had a bunch of podium finishes, which is top 8. Too many to name at this time. But, great performances for this program that, I've been high on for a while, that keeps, having better production year after year under Bobby Farrell. They're next up in the NCAA East first round, which will be held on May 22nd through 25th in Lexington, Kentucky. In terms of lacrosse, both those seasons are now over, but some good news for Shane Knobloch, who's been a tremendous player for Rutgers. Now was named by 2 different publications, Lacrosse USA and also Inside Lacrosse, as a first-team All-American. He becomes the first 4-time All-American 4 years in a row in program history, and was just unbelievable for Brian Brecht over his career. Midfielder that's just one of the best in program history, obviously, and finishes in a high note. Unfortunately, they went 7-6, but they finished last in the Big Ten. Were unable to make or really challenge for an NCAA tournament bid. That's a whole nother discussion. And Ross Scott has been a great player for Rutgers as well. But congratulations to Shane Knobloch. And also Cassidy Spillis, a 4-time All-American as well, being named a second-team All-American this year, leaves the all-time program leader in goals, points, and draw controls. In terms of Rutgers softball, season ends in disappointment in what was a very good year and progress with Kristen Butler's team. They earned the highest seed in program history, the 3 seed in the Big Ten tournament last week. Unfortunately, they got upset by Wisconsin in the quarterfinals. I watched that game. Actually, it was Thursday night. Definitely, I think, some nerves in terms of how they started. and they just never really seemed to get on track. Had some, a couple of errors that happened in that game and mistakes that, weren't characteristic of this team. Still a very good year for them. And they had to win the Big Ten tournament to make the NCAA tournament. Their RPI is still just in the 80s. So they needed to make a run, and unfortunately they could not. But certainly positive news that Rutgers softball making, big strides in year 6 of Kristen Butler. Rutgers baseball, unfortunately, lost another series to Penn State, 2 out of 3. They go into their last Big Ten regular season series this weekend, hosting Ohio State. But very disappointing year for Coach Steve Owens. They're now 5-16 in Big Ten play. They do have a winning record on the season. Pitching's been the big story. I want to talk about that soon, once their season's over. But you have to imagine, I think men's lacrosse, women's lacrosse, baseball, all kind of taking steps back the last couple of years, not really competing for NCAA tournament bids like they did a couple of years ago. And you have to imagine NIL is a factor in that. So I want to get more into that soon, and I will, but just wanted to reference that there. And then Rutgers rowing, they're going into the Big Ten championships this weekend. They're now ranked number 13th nationally. Justin Price doing great work there, and will certainly have plenty of coverage as they advance into the postseason. Portal season in effect for basketball, which I touched on, and football. CJ West, who I discussed last week, he also ultimately chose Indiana. So we'll see if Rutgers continues to pursue help on the defensive side of the ball, specifically the defensive line. As of now, no news. But I had a recent podcast with David Anderson to talk about the recent additions for the program. Check that out from last week. And we'll have plenty more this week on the Scarlet Faithful podcast. Always appreciate everyone who listens and watches. If you can like, subscribe, whatever you can do to help me grow this. Really appreciate it. And hope everyone has a fantastic week. And I'll be back to talk to you tomorrow.